Do you want to learn how to sound design? Today I want to show you exactly how to do it. Now there's this common myth around sound design in that it's very, very difficult and that everybody that does know how to do it actually knows what they're doing. As somebody that does know a thing or two about sound design, I do want to debunk that in the sense that whenever I'm actually sound designing, yes, I know kind of what the processes are doing and kind of know what the knobs are doing when I'm adding them to the sound, but I'm never in my head already aware of the outcome that I'm going to get. Let's have a look at a few examples together. So for example, we have this sound over here that I made. Nice glassy type of lead here. And this is just made with the tones from the tones pack and a saw wave going through this filter over here. As you can see, the saw wave is 3 octaves higher and 15 voices of unison. Now, all of this might seem very deliberate in that I was going for this very glassy type of sound, but truth be told, I just opened the tones from the tones pack, then added a filter to it. In this case, I went with this very special flanger phaser filter over here. And then I added the saw wave here. I decided to play with the unison a little bit. I decided to play with the octave a little bit, and I was just experimenting on how it felt. And truth be told, the same is true with the filter and the same is true with the exact tone that I ended up using from the tones pack here. I don't know exactly what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm actually looking for. I just stumble upon ideas. So for example, here in this flanger filter, the reason why I chose this was not because I exactly knew that this was going to get me the sound that I was aiming for, but I knew that this was a filter that I normally don't often use, and I just wanted to experiment with it, and therefore I clicked on it and it happened to work. Now, quick intermission. Before we continue, I do quickly want to say that if you're new here, make sure that you like the video and that you're subscribed. Also, you can support me financially by checking out my products on Gumroad or checking out my Patreon page, where you'll get early access to videos, priority in feedback streams, and many more benefits. Links for both of them are going to be in the description, so now let's get back into the video. There's this super strange mentality that I often see around people that don't know how to sound design and are just maybe getting into production, in that they expect that you need to know everything before you get started with the learning process. What that means is that they'll never open up a synth because they don't know how to use it, and therefore they'll never learn it. But as you can probably imagine, that's not how anything works. You don't pick up any skill by learning everything there is and then starting to learn the skill. That's not how it works. You slowly absorb the information as it's coming to you as you're experimenting more and more and more. Say, for example, a skill like cooking, you don't learn cooking by first learning all of the existing flavors and techniques and ways of cutting something and all of the different recipes and then start to cook your first thing. That's not how it works. You learn one recipe, you just look up a recipe and you try it out, you experiment with that a little bit, and then you move on to the next recipe. In our cases with sound design, the recipe really are the tutorials, which you can just follow step by step. The important thing to do when you're following the tutorial, though, if you actually want to learn something, is to note down the different things that the tutorial is doing and that the sound is doing based on the different parameters that you set. Say we look at the most basic of examples. Here I have an initialized patch, and what I want to do is make the classic dead mouse pluck. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first play it. We hear that we have a saw wave. This is the basic sound that you always hear when you initialize a patch. And now say that I found a tutorial that explains exactly how to make the dead mouse pluck, the EDM dead mouse pluck. It just says something like use your envelope 2 and just make a shape like this. Turn on the filter and apply it to the filter like this. What I now note down mentally is the fact that because this shape looks like this, we can essentially see the filter going down over this time, over this shape. If we zoom in, it's a little bit clearer. The filter starts almost opened up. That's what this graph is telling us. It starts almost opened up, and then it just goes down over time. You just make a note of this mental idea. And now what we can also see is what this filter is doing. We can see that this is the frequency spectrum. We just know that because that's how frequency spectra work. We've seen it in EQs, we've seen it other places, so we already know what this is doing. And we can just interpret what the graph is telling us in that it is filtering out the higher frequencies because it is just rolling off like this. There's some immediate information that we can learn of this. For example, what the resonance does. It just clearly shows it in the graph what the resonance does. We can see what the different filter slopes do, in that it determines the steepness of this roll-off. Therefore, we can probably interpret this as being brighter. And then if we go down like this, it is going to be a lot darker because it's rolling off more quickly. So now we have this sound again. And say that the next step in the tutorial is to add some unison here. Something like this. we immediately notice that we get this stereo widened feeling to it, and that is something that we can mentally, again, save in our memory. It is just another step in the recipe that we can then use in other scenarios where we want to do something similar. To go back into this other patch, I decided to experiment with this oscillator over here, and I wanted this to be a very big wide sound. So I decided to add a lot of voices with some detune that then adds the extra width that I was after. Now the final thing that I should probably say is that a lot of the different sounds that you hear are much simpler than you initially think. As you can see, this is just 2 wave cycles going through a filter. There's no effects, there's a little bit of a volume envelope over here, but there's no modulations whatsoever in this patch. And this is enough for a sound to be okay. Here's another example. This is a patch that I made again from a tones from the tones pack. This is one of my starting points usually. What I do recommend is that you have some kind of wavetail pack or tones pack that you can start off with so that you don't have to get the initial tone. You already have that in the oscillator. But in this case, it's a tones from the tones pack going through a bandpass filter with a note on random on the filter cutoff. More simpler than this you cannot get. And you can hear the complexity that you get out of a patch like this. So here something like this can be very, very simple if you wanted to. Of course, this is heavily predicated on having a tone like this. You can also use your own FM setup if you're into that kind of thing. So to give you a classic example, I can use a sub oscillator and oscillator B over here to just set up an FM, something like this. Maybe change the tone a little bit. Maybe get another starting sound here. And again, it may have looked like this was very deliberate what I did, but I just took 2 different waveforms and kind of randomly chose them actually. Now you might say, well, okay, yeah, but sometimes I'm just after a very specific sound. In that case, I would recommend seeing if there's a tutorial available, seeing if there's somebody else that helps you with that. But those should be the minority of times. Whenever you're just writing your music, you should be focusing probably on capturing those happy little accidents that you often get when sound designing by just doing things and experimenting, because that is actually how you learn. Now, my final tip for actually learning something like this is to just do it, as I said, but to have a plan in place to actually do it. So for example, when I started off my YouTube channel, I wanted to get good at sound design really quickly inside of Psytrance. I was actually just starting out making Psytrance seriously. I had been making it for a year and a half at that time, roughly, but just experimentally on the side while I was working on other music projects. But when Projector, the channel here, really started to take off, obviously I decided full on focus on the Psytrance stuff. So I said to myself, I really need to learn how to sound design. I really need to learn how to do all of this stuff. So what I decided to do is make 1 patch a day for a month. And not just simply experimenting like we see over here, where it's just randomly doing things. No, I would follow a tutorial. I would take notes. I would take mental notes, but also physically in a notebook. I unfortunately no longer have that notebook, so I cannot show that to you. I talked about how I'm bad at saving all of that stuff and keeping that around. You can find that in the highlights video actually. But anyway, that was the key moment for me, how I learned to do psychedelic sound design. I had been sound designing before that. I've mainly been making dubstep. So in that genre, you also have to sound design, but in a different way. It's much more about distortion and stronger FMing and more open filters where the modulation is more gradual. To give you an example of that, what we're doing here in this patch is changing the filter position every 16 note, and it's just kind of statically moving from one to another point, stepping like that. When you're doing sound design for dubstep, it relies much more on the LFOs here, and you would have a wobble, maybe something like this, and this would be, I guess, 1/2 in terms of rate. So these might seem like small differences in just philosophy, but all of those add up in a completely different approach to sound design. And using those 30 days, I actually learned how to just change up my sound design to be more in that psychedelic region. So that's how I learned it, and that's how you can learn it too. I hope that this video was helpful. Let me know if it is. But that's going to be it for today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.
It's impossible to tell.